Welcome to Truly Terrified, Paranormal versus Physics, where we talk about some really weird stuff and Joe, the scientist, explains how it's not possible, or maybe it is. I'm Lynn and...
I'm Joe.
We spent significant portions of our lives living in the Mojave Desert. We enjoyed hiking, camping, and desert bombing around on all the dirt roads. We may even have shot off a gun or two in those excursions into the desert. Did you ever shoot off any guns?
Yeah, I remember the one time it was like the kids and everyone were shooting off guns, and then someone looked away or something, and I was holding it out, and I rotated.
Oh, it was you? I thought it was India.
No, I'm pretty sure it was me.
Oh,
well, maybe it was her.
And then everybody just hit the ground.
Yeah, as they should have.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? And that shit's still going on.
I know. We lived. We all lived.
That's true.
Where we lived, a popular day or overnight hike was to walk down a wash until you came to a cliff or two, and eventually you got to the Colorado River. There were hot springs and lots of wildlife. And when you walked along that wash that followed the old Hoover Dam Road, there were ancient car wrecks. Some still had suitcases in them back then. Did you ever see those?
I don't recall.
Well, they probably were pretty much...
I mean, in the dump, there's shit like that, but...
Those car wrecks were really remarkable, and they probably had been picked over pretty thoroughly by the time you were walking in the desert age. We always got really quiet when we walked by those wrecks because it felt like a graveyard. Undoubtedly, the passengers in those cars died in the wrecks because it was quite a ways down from the road above. But apparently there are other things out in the desert. While I've never seen anything supernaturally creepy, I've heard stories. All right.
If there were dead people in the cars, then presumably the cars are haunted.
There were no bodies, and I think we even looked for blood.
Doesn't it require only that you have died in a spot for your ghost to inhabit that spot?
No, I don't think so. I think that ghosts can follow you. Ghosts could inhabit you.
Well, that's creepy.
Yeah. Okay, well, it is creepy in the desert at night. The coyotes singing sound like screams of women being murdered, and there's always the rustle of animals moving around. Did you ever camp out in the desert?
I don't think so.
It is
Seems like it'd be a very good place to camp.
It is really neat, and it's very different from camping in the woods.
Yeah, as long as you don't wake up with snakes and...
Yeah, that was my concern. I was always kind of freaked out about it because of that. Add to that the morbid car crashes we had to walk by to get to our camping spot, and I was always pretty scared when we camped out in the desert, mainly because rattlesnakes.
Yeah, especially at night because you can't necessarily see them.
Yeah, and in the desert, I mean, you're not doing it, well, we did sometimes do it in the summertime when it was super hot, but you're not doing it usually when it's super hot, so it gets kind of cold at night, especially down in a canyon. And so where do the snakes want to go? Where it's warm.
Yeah,
which is in your
exactly.
sleeping bag.
That's the folk knowledge of snakes is they will crawl in bed with you.
Yeah, very, very worrisome. Okay, so this story happened to my little brother in broad daylight. It was not nighttime. There were no car crashes around it. There was nothing like that. Chris and his friend Danny went out for a hike on their own. They were pretty young, but I think they were probably teenagers. Their plan was to walk along the power line road to a point where it forks. To the right is that canyon we used to walk down, but if you go straight ahead, the road winds around and eventually comes out on the highway to Hoover Dam, where a tourist place called Fort Lucinda was. It's not called that anymore. And where that spot is probably where when you and me and David and Karen went out and we got stopped by the rangers.
Yeah.
So imagine that, because of course now there's a big freeway that goes through there, but at that point it was very different. Chris and Danny were going to walk all the way to Fort Lucinda where my mom was going to pick them up. So when you're walking in the desert, one rest strategy is to stop and look ahead to where you're going or back from where you came, as if you're scanning the distance while you catch your breath. And, that's just kind of what people do. Or
it's a neat thing, too, because you can see, where you've been and, the progress.
Yeah.
You don't get that, when you're in flat woods or something.
No. Because
it's just continuous trees.
Yeah. So you can see quite a distance when you do that. So one of the times they stopped, Chris looked back toward where they'd been, and he saw something moving. It was black and large. He knew it couldn't be a car because that was a freaking canyon with a wash in the bottom and lots of drop-offs, so no car could actually drive it. He thought it looked like a big black trash bag sort of undulating in the breeze. And when I asked Tom about this, my other brother, he said that was what they both said at the time. Chris and Danny both said it looked like a trash bag, only bigger.
Huge.
It was huge. He and Danny decided to push on toward their meeting place, getting creeped out by whatever that black thing was, but in just a few minutes, Chris couldn't help himself and he looked behind them. The black thing was significantly closer and it looked formless, like a blob, and it was moving fast, bobbing and dancing and bouncing
So wait a
across the
second.
desert.
Couldn't it have been like a tarp or a trash, like a bag or a piece of fabric or right?
Well,
I mean, that is not unusual, especially when it gets windy.
but it wasn't just, if a bag was flying, it would kind of be like a flag goes, It would
Yeah,
be
and they
moving
don't
like
go
that.
very fast. They go wind speed.
And this was full. I mean, if it was a bag full of crumpled up newspaper, I could see that.
Because a tarp actually does kind of collapse eventually and then
Right.
rolls back into a larger shape and
Right, and it would look like, I would think, because I've seen tarps blowing in the wind on really windy days in the Las Vegas Valley, and they kind of unfurl and then furl back up, and they're not a big ball or a blob moving along.
could it have been tumbleweeds? There are some massive congregations of tumbleweeds that can form.
Well, it was black and it was undulating.
Okay. So presumably not.
And this was before drones, so you couldn't say that it was like
A vehicle.
a vehicle of some sort.
At least not an everyday vehicle.
And I don't think weather balloons are black generally.
I don't think so because black material absorbs more heat. And so that
that would make sense.
It would create a problem, I think.
So soon, Chris and Danny were running, and they made it to Fort Lucinda in one piece, but the thing followed them the whole way. And there's a lot of twists and turns to that road, a lot of ups and downs.
They're going east?
Would that be north?
I think they're going east. If they went out of town, they're going
Well, they went out of town east, and then they headed north towards
So they're moving uphill and east.
Well, generally uphill, but think about that road.
Yeah, there's
it goes
a lot
down
of
and up and down and winds around. And back
ups and
then,
downs.
it did. If you think about where we were shooting the guns that time, that was quite a windy road. Or I know it's the same road, or generally the same road where we found the old mine, and we went into it.
Yeah.
So that was winding and up and down, and so that was where they were. That's it was following them. So that's interesting. So in our family, we called it the Black Blob, and it was sort of a legend and that we kind of maybe believed in, but it was Chris. So,
Yeah. Well, Tom,
well...
he said he saw it.
No, did Tom say he saw it?
Well, I thought you said he...
No, Tom asked Chris and Danny about it.
Oh, okay,
Right
I see what
after
you're
it,
saying.
yeah.
So what I was kind of one of the things I was thinking, but then I don't think it works, is an actual mirage. Like, if the angle you're looking at the ground is such, the heat waves actually bend the light so much that you're looking at a different thing at a different angle. And if there's a dark thing on the horizon and the light is being bent up towards it, you will see an image of that thing. There's actually something, it's people looking at the horizon on the ocean, and if there's the sun, the moon, land, a ship over the horizon, you can actually occasionally see it.
Oh, I've heard of that.
And
yeah.
it's a mirage of that thing, which looks strange. Sometimes it looks like it's floating. I mean, you can think it's air mass over the water, and you're reflecting around it.
Right.
But the problem with that explaining the black blob thing is if they're looking at different angles, it would only work from one angle. They would not see it
Right.
in any other circumstance.
Right.
Just that one particular case.
So one thing
It's pretty rare.
One thing that's occurred to me a lot over the years is that, when, like we've talked about before, when you get spooked, it's kind of like a mass hysteria thing, and people can feed on another person's fear. So, who knows? But Tom asked Danny once they were adults. So this is years after this happened. He ran into Danny and he asked him about it. And Danny refused to say anything. He didn't even say, "Oh, I'm not going to talk about that." He said nothing. And so one of the thoughts I had was that it didn't really happen, or at least it wasn't something that Danny experienced because, and he was just humoring Chris or something.
Yeah.
Or it was so terrifying he couldn't even speak of it. Or he's very religious now, and maybe he decided it was evil.
Oh, yeah.
And that he didn't want to give
shut it out of his head,
energy or something.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know. My kind of feeling is that I've heard a lot of stories that are literally made up, and people hear them secondhand or something, and then they believe them, or it becomes a folk legend. Like, you might not necessarily believe about Bigfoot, but you can tell the story about Bigfoot or someone's story about Bigfoot. You know what I mean? It's you don't even inject like, I believe this, I don't believe this. It's just, here's a story about Bigfoot. The implication is that it's true by saying a story about a real event, quote unquote. It could have been as simple as they were joking, and then it morphed from there,
Right. Or, who knows?
But I think we've talked about in the past, like just off the top of my head, there's a lot of like, not experimental, but kind of more rare stuff in the desert. Like at the dry lake bed, the RV stuff, which probably was after this event.
Yeah, I don't think anybody did that then.
But on dry lake beds, racing, because it's a very flat surface. And then you have airbase.
Nellis Air Force Base, yeah.
Just like northwest of there, which over mountain ranges, but still. And then you have experimental aircraft at Area 51, which is 60, 70 miles north or something.
Yeah. I don't know if this was before or after they changed the flight path, because when I was a kid, the Nellis Air Force Base used to actually fly their stuff right over Boulder City, and they were allowed to fly it and break the sound barrier, so you'd get sonic booms all the time. And to me, that was absolutely terrifying. But other people didn't seem to be affected by it that way. They thought it was cool. So who knows? I mean, it could be any number of things. But having looked up weird things that happen in the desert, there are lots of people. I didn't see any stories of people who saw blobs in the desert like this, although I do have another story, and it's kind of a blob. I did see lots of stories of people that saw things in the desert. So who knows? I mean, who really knows? It's big.
Kind of reminds me of like, there's been a few stories over the years of black blobs that are like really tiny. I can't remember. There's a few stories in the family.
Yeah.
And then there's like, peripheral vision stories that people in close family has had. And occasionally you'll see them on the internet, like a black formless blob that darts around,
Yeah.
Actually, honestly, I would just like expect there to be like folklore and myths about blobs, because blobs are really easy to see.
And yet, if you do a search on the internet of supernatural blobs, you don't find.
It's kind of funny because there's the fiction, science fiction idea of gray goo, which is an ever expanding like machine mass. So it's in there. It's in our cultural knowledge that there's the idea of a blob or a formless thing that is ominous somehow.
Well, one thing about Chris is that he was always interested in and talking about really creepy stuff. I mean, not like ghosts and stuff, just creepy stuff and science fiction and stuff. And so I tended always to really sort of lean on the fact that his mind went that direction. They were talking about that stuff. They got themselves spooked and freaked out. Maybe they saw something to begin with. And then if you're hurrying and you're just glancing behind you quickly, you know.
Could it be as simple as a black rock?
Really, yeah. Yeah,
and then you see another dark rock, and then, you know.
Yeah, and then you're just manufacturing it.
Yeah.
Because as we know, your brain fills your what you take in through your eyes, your brain fills in the empty spots.
Yeah.
And so, who knows? Who really knows?
There's also such, like, clouds moving create shadows. If there's a vehicle and the vehicle is emitting smoke, black smoke, that could be really close to, you know, like a cloud of black smoke moving across the desert. You could misinterpret that very easily.
Yeah.
But, like, if you assume, okay, it is like something, it's a not prosaic thing, then, again, there's like no myths about a fast-moving black blob in the desert.
Not that I could find.
Which is kind of interesting, because it is a very, especially, it's like the contrast. You're going from, there's no interesting, unique concept, and then there is one, and then the contrast of not having one to having one, it's like surprising, and it amplifies the creepy factor.
Right.
You know?
This next story is kind of a blob story, but it's a little different. It's got a lot more to it than my brother's story. This comes from a guy named Bryce. So Bryce said there is something terrible roaming around the desert in Arizona. All I know about Bryce is that he's a gainfully employed and educated and a seemingly reasonable adult man. I know nothing else about him. So he decided to go visit his brother in Arizona. That's where his brother lived. And they thought they'd do some hiking and eat at some good Mexican restaurants. They hadn't seen each other in a while, and Bryce was looking forward to some brotherly bonding. The whole thing would be on his brother's dime because he'd recently received a big bonus at work, so it all sounded like a win-win situation. They met up and hung out around Phoenix, Tempe, and Chandler and ate good food. For 2 days they did that. And then they branched out and went to Sedona and a few other areas. So they're having a good time. He was planning on leaving the next day when his brother suggested that they end their trip doing something outside. They'd already gone hiking, but they wanted to do another outdoorsy thing since they knew Bryce wouldn't be able to once he got back home where the weather was snowy and rainy. I don't know why, but I got the feeling he lived in Utah. I might be wrong about that. And maybe he chose Bryce because Bryce Canyon, whatever
Makes
it is.
sense.
And, yeah. So they found a decent place to camp for a day in southern Arizona, somewhere near the border, not far off from where they had already hiked. With Arizona being a desert, there was plenty of land and open space for them to spread out their stuff and relax. The drive out to the spot, which lasted a couple of hours, gave them time to chat and listen to some music they both like. I think I pretty much have a good idea where they were, too. They brought the usual camping supplies, tents, food and water, flashlights, flares, a radio, just, regular stuff. Since it was just one day, an evening and a night, they only brought basics. Bryce's brother's truck was parked about a half a mile away from their campsite to preserve the camping atmosphere, and it was still reasonably accessible and within sight. When it got dark, they were just hanging out, catching up on everything they hadn't covered the first 2 days and eating the leftover food they'd saved from those restaurant dinners. Hopefully they'd saved it in an ice chest, because otherwise this doesn't sound like it'd be healthy.
No.
There was no one else out that they could see, and the nearest road was about 2 miles from where they'd parked. It was mostly flat desert in every direction. So I can picture this down near Benson or even Tombstone. So that big valley between those two mountain ranges, somewhere down there, because I think the next valley over is more developed. But that one's got some really open land in there. Around 10 p.m., just after they'd finished eating and had gathered up their trash, they saw something off to the north about a half a mile from their camp. There was a mound in the desert, but it seemed to move. It seemed to inch towards them every few seconds. Not continuously, but in steady lurches, as if the energy or effort for each motion needed to be mustered.
That's creepy.
The mound was the same color as the sand, but even from the distance they'd initially spotted it, they could tell that it wasn't made of sand. So it wasn't like a dust devil coming at them. The surface, while sand-colored, was fuzzy. In a way that was highly uncomfortable to look at for more than a few seconds. Bryce turned to his brother and saw him.
Matted bunny fur?
Well, he went on to describe it. So his brother was having the same reaction, and they both like rubbed their eyes looking at this thing. Let me see where I wrote down what he said that it looked like. Well, I'll get to that, I guess. Now, Bryce doesn't know why they just sat there, maybe a mixture of awe and fear, but they didn't move until the thing was only a few yards away. At that distance, the size of the thing finally registered to them. It was huge, an immense body that towered over them. Bryce has since wondered if the sheer flatness of the area made it seem larger than it really was, but sitting before it, looking up at that wall of uncanny fuzziness, really gave the impression of enormity. They stared at it without speaking, both feeling something more than just basic fear. When it got really, really uncomfortably close, Bryce felt sick, not queasy or nauseous, but more like delirious, as if being in close proximity with it had caused some sort of sudden neurological issue. While he didn't notice it at the time, looking back now, he's certain that his mind had simply been unwilling or unable to fully grasp the thing's appearance. It was that weird. So he talked to his brother several times since then, and each time they tried to recall and describe the thing, and they came up with new descriptions. So this is what they said. It was a haphazard shape, not necessarily formless but spread out. The texture of it was like an old dried out washcloth.
Oh.
With tiny, almost microscopic pins all over its surface. Like, you know how terry cloth has little things that stick out? Ew, it just sounds gross.
But they weren't that close enough to see that there were microscopic pins all over it.
Well, he said the texture was like microscopic pins all over it.
So as if.
Yeah. He said thousands of them. And somehow those pins were vibrating.
He couldn't actually see these microscopic pins vibrating. He just got that impression.
Yeah. So there was a fuzziness to it that his impression was like it was an old, dried out washcloth. And he said old. So like a washcloth that's crusty and gross.
That.
The form of it, so that was the texture of it. The form of it was like a shapeless flower with no real center, with ugly petals that were unfurled.
Oh, I can get what he's talking about. Well, okay. Couldn't that be just a giant mass of tumbleweeds?
You're right. Yes,
Doesn't that seem like it would be a perfect dead ring? Like if stuff was in it, you know. And the thing about the vibe,
because
he wasn't that close.
It would be moving. He didn't mention anything about whether it was windy or anything like that. Because wind,
it doesn't necessarily roll at that point. It could be dragging.
Yeah.
I've never actually seen like a wad that big.
I have. I've seen them.
But supposedly it happens.
Yeah.
So, and if it's like, you know, it has like bushes and it's picked up like trash, the surface could look like anything.
Yeah.
It's a large, lightweight object that's formless because it's just a wad of tumbleweeds.
And it would kind of move in fits and starts.
Based on the wind.
Yeah, it would just kind of jerk around. And also based on what it was running into on the ground. Okay,
yeah.
so
But another thing is, he said it was like he was having a neurological issue. If it wasn't for the two people purported to see it, that could be a neurological issue. It could be entirely just...
Oh, yeah. Okay, so that is an interesting point. It's like Chris and Danny, that Danny wouldn't speak of it.
Yeah.
So his brother wouldn't speak of it for a long time.
Interesting.
Okay, so he didn't see any eyes, feelers, antenna, any sense organs. It was only this massive, ever mobile body. But that...
Was he saying like it's writhing? Is that what he means by the vibration and all that?
He did.
Because like if you picture a caterpillar or something,
it did sound like that. It did sound like there were pieces that came out of it and came back in.
Interesting.
But not like antennas or feelers or something.
Again, that's nothing that wouldn't be out of the realm of just a huge tumbleweed mass.
Right. He actually never said how big he thought it was. He didn't...
than huge.
Yeah, he didn't say like it was 20 feet in diameter or something. He just said it was huge. It was immense. Okay, so one of the parts of it drifted by him. And it's interesting they said...
Like he's just sitting there and
they were just sitting there frozen, staring at this, and it came close and a piece of it reached out and drifted by him. And he thought maybe it was a missed attempt to touch him, or maybe it was part of its self-propulsion It was whatever was making it move. He didn't sound like he was like prone to
hallucinations.
Yeah, it didn't sound like, and it didn't sound like they were stoned or drunk or anything.
Oh yeah, if that one thing is if they're using any sort of drugs.
Yeah, it didn't sound like that.
Especially since they're brothers. They're brothers, right?
Yeah.
You said they're brothers.
It didn't sound like they were doing anything other than eating too much and
allegedly.
Well, yeah, I mean he could say whatever he wants. Okay, so as it came by him, he said he felt the space around him shift like it was pulled away in the wake of the part. So that's kind of woo sounding. That kind of sounds.
So like wind, or like.
Or I don't know.
Because I mean.
I don't know. I don't know what he meant by that. He said that the interaction, the attempting to touch him with this part, this petal-like piece that came out and drifted past him, scared him more than the sight of the thing. Well, I would guess so. If something's reaching out to try and touch you.
It's like a difference between seeing a tiger in the distance and having a tiger's claws right in your face.
Yeah, or lick you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so just about then, he heard his brother make some sort of noise like a gasp or a startled sound, and he turned towards him, and he saw another part of the thing passing over his brother's head. And he realized the thing was now above them. It was moving over them. He looked and expected to see like the underside of an octopus or a starfish, like mouth parts or something, but he could see no difference. The thing was just more of the same all over it. And
so he didn't notice that it had actually completely encompassed them?
It was not on them. It was going over them.
What?
He said he described it as more of that pulsing, buzzing, prickly flesh. That seems to have more body than tumbleweeds. I mean, I've seen giant tumbleweed piles, and they do not look solid. I mean, they kind of look solid.
It does look like a bush.
It looks like a dried up bush. Only it just looks like a giant one.
Even when they're packed together.
Yeah. So I wouldn't call it flesh.
Now, however, again, they're kind of prickly. They can pick up trash and shit. I mean, they can actually like collect stuff as they're rolling along.
Yes, they can.
And I don't know, when was that? Because if it's in the air of plastic bags, then
yeah, it was.
It could be entirely plastic bags.
It's like probably in the last few years.
Oh, okay. So to me, the weird part especially is how he's saying he feels about it, like the vibrating thing. So presumably he did see it up close when it's literally entirely over their bodies.
Heads, yeah.
But how did he not notice? And this is the other thing. I've seen a lot of videos like people creeped out at something, and it's usually just like the wind blowing or whatever. Mm-hmm. But they pretty much always immediately run. They don't just sit there. They run immediately.
You're right. You're right.
And I just can't imagine, unless it's extremely dark, they just don't notice that it's also over them.
Well, once it had passed, they could see the car or see the truck. So it couldn't have been so dark that they couldn't see the truck. And the truck was a distance
like twilight?
Away. He said it was night. But
there's no way. I just can't
when
imagine.
When you're out in the desert and it's dark and your eyes get used to it,
you can see pretty well.
Yeah.
The colors are a little weird, but because you can't really see colors.
Okay, so your point that they didn't run is a good one for arguing that maybe they were stoned.
Yeah.
Because
and keep in mind that could be anything. I mean, it's not just like weed. It could be any combination of things.
Okay, I'm going to
you pretty much any mental state you can think of. There's something that artificially induces that.
I'll go back on what I said earlier, and I will say that I think maybe it was a dust devil. And the reason why is because I've never been underneath a dust devil before, but a dust devil generally isn't as slender as a tornado. It's usually fatter, and it kind of moves around a little bit.
That's true. And if you don't notice,
if you're at this angle, you're looking straight at it.
Mm-hmm.
And it might appear that it's moving in fits and starts when in actuality it's because it's kind of jerking around.
Yeah, the wind is changing and it's
and
going
he
over.
did say it was pulsing and buzzing. And
is-
so if you had a dust devil, it would send out little feelers.
Yeah, and well, the main thing though is you're misinterpreting how close it is. So it can be over top of you, it can be like right up in your face, quote unquote. But really it's much further away, because if it's a dust devil, you're gonna get pelted with sand and shit.
Right.
And they're also, same with the tumbleweeds, there could be any number of things in the dust devil.
That is true, yes. Okay, so as it was going over, he says since it hadn't tried to eat or attack them, he thought maybe it couldn't see or sense them. So he turned to his brother and whispered, "Don't move," and they both stayed motionless out of sheer terror. You know, when he said that it was moving towards them, I'm trying to look back and see, it gave the impression that it was moving slowly. So it sounds like they would have had plenty of opportunity.
Yeah, how the hell
to move.
A mountain just sneaks up on you as you're looking at it? What?
Right. And the other thing is that he talked about it like it was a huge, immense body that towered over them. That sounds like a dust devil to me. It was buzzing, it was vibrating,
I don't
it was
usually
towering
say
over
like,
them.
oh, you know, like, let's not even entertain the idea it's something, you know, strange. In this case, their reactions mean, their reactions, if this is a true story, like, they're recounting it, you know, how they acted, regardless what the thing was, how they acted is true, then how they acted didn't correspond to what they're purporting to have seen.
I agree.
So their actions are really the strange thing. Now, in a movie, you know, in like, you know, a shitty 50s monster movie with the blob of like maggots or whatever, then you'll have people like screaming in terror silently, of course, as the thing's like 300 feet away, and then it slowly comes toward them and it cuts like to their face and then the thing and their face and the thing, and then it envelops them and kills them. That's not, I mean, I've seen so many real like videos of people responding to creepy things or like sudden things.
Yep.
And they make noise, they run, like they don't just freeze in terror.
Right.
They don't pass out. That's a thing too.
Well, there might be some people who pass out.
Yeah, but think like way back when, like in an old movie, a particular woman, sees something frightening and they pass out. That I have not actually seen a real video
of someone
who does that.
Yeah. Well, okay, so then they said they didn't agree on how long the whole thing took, but they do agree that it spent about somewhere between 20 and 45 seconds passing over top of them. Mm-hmm. That's a long time. That's a slow-moving thing. 45 seconds is a long time.
Yeah. So another thing is surprising things. That's what your brain learns. So surprising things are going to like set off a chain of events in your brain. And one of the things that people do when they learn something is they tell people. Or they gossip, or they want to inform everyone they know. And so the reaction to something like that is like intense. It's like there's a police shooting. You ask the people in the neighborhood, what did you see? And there might be some like this person said this happened before that, and then the other person says, no, it was the other way around. But they all said, whoa, there was this bang, and then the guy dropped on the floor and he was dead. You know, there's like some kind of core, this definitely is like, they're all saying this, it's intense, it's, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like if I was walking to the gym or whatever, and I saw like a creepy monster crawling along the thing, or like a disgusting rag vibrating over my head, then I would immediately come back here and tell everybody. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It wouldn't be like, oh yeah, remember that time? I wonder what that was. You know what I mean?
I agree.
That's...
Okay, so after it had gone over them and moved behind them, they got up the courage to turn around and look.
Okay. Every single thing that they are supposed to be doing.
Okay, so here is why them not running doesn't make any sense. I was under the impression the whole time that the thing was coming from the direction where the truck was parked, but it wasn't, because when they turned around to look and it was gone, the truck was still there just where they'd parked it. So to run away from it would be running towards the truck.
What the fuck?
Why would you sit there while something, if it took 45 seconds for it to pass over their heads, how long did it take to come from the distance to get to them? You know, that, I think they were stoned out of their gourds.
Yeah.
Just think, and it was a dust devil with pricklies in it.
So to me, like, if you're under the influence of something, it is the suggestibility. So it's like mass psychosis under the influence is more prevalent. So one of them sees a cloud passing over, you know, and then he tells the other guy who's also high on something, wow, look at this washcloth vibrating monster thing. You know what I mean?
And then
they like stare off into space for a while.
Yeah. I wonder if studies have been done on the suggestibility after the fact of somebody who was stoned and then saying, yeah, you remember that thing we saw in the sky? And the person thinks, yeah, I saw something in the sky.
A false memory.
And then they kind of create that false memory.
I know that certain psychoactive substances induce brain plasticity. So that means you actually have new connections forming at a higher rate than normal. So, like, entertaining the idea with this would mean there's, like, presumably a creature, right?
Yeah, that's what he's implying.
Creature.
That it's a creature of some sort.
That is crawling through the desert with, like, these appendages, you know. That's really creepy.
Yeah.
But, man, oh, man, the black blob thing, I could imagine that. You know, you're looking back, you see this thing, and you're saying, what the fuck is that? Let's keep going. Still way off of the distance. And you're, like, still moving away from it. This, though...
And they were running.
I just cannot imagine.
It just seems very unlikely. But let's say it was some kind of creature. What would be the point of it all? What was it doing? Why would it do that?
Presumably, if it's a creature, it is consuming, it's reproducing. Okay, so, like, what's more likely? You can basically always say something that's, like, associated with real life things is more likely. You know, or things you've seen before. Things that aren't strange or, like, out there. Imagine it is a cluster of moths. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's more likely than a giant amorphous creature. Because we've never seen that. We've seen clusters of moths. What about a bunch of high schoolers who have made this, like, giant ghillie suit and they're walking through the desert? You know what I mean? That's way more likely. So I just think the telling thing to me is I couldn't see normal people. Think about a bear, okay? A bear would be less terrifying than a giant pulsating amorphous blob.
Buzzing, prickly blob.
Okay? If someone saw a bear coming towards their camp, they would fucking run. And so they see a giant amorphous blob doesn't just terrify you to the point you just keel over and let it consume you.
I think when he said that he felt like he had some neurological misfunction or dysfunction, that he was implying that the thing affected his neurological function in some way.
Yeah. You know, there's like this whole like science fiction books before, I don't know. Well, it's more like not hard science fiction books, you know. Especially though way back when, like pre-80s, let's say. They have a lot of like not even speculative technologies, but like just plain old wrong or that could never happen technologies.
Right.
Like a ray gun that makes you forget. a highly, like, that would be a technology that is so completely ridiculously impossible.
Right.
It just, I don't even know how you could possibly, you know what I mean? Like, UFOs, you could imagine, okay, they're using, like, general relativistic effects to move around. That's something you can imagine. You don't know how to make it, but you can see how that could work. Science fiction in the past, especially science fiction, I think horror stuff too, they would have these, like, the effects before the cause. They don't even say a cause. They don't have a mechanism how it will work. They just do this like magic or something. You know what I mean? So presumably there's a cause. If you live in real life, there's a cause essentially to everything. So for something like, oh, you know, it as this thing approaches, it just, like, is somehow telepathically manipulating my emotions.
And yet that is a really common theme in so many cryptid encounters.
So the reason I say, like, it's common in science fiction, it's common whatever, is the people who are making that up, those fiction or whatever, they need something to happen. They need, like, the person they can't move.
Right.
They're paralyzed.
So that they can have whatever interaction they need to have happen.
Because otherwise they wouldn't be able, it wouldn't make any sense.
They have to progress the story, and
so,
if everybody just runs away, the story's over.
And as far as I know, that's what people do. They run the fuck away when they see a giant amorphous pulsating blob.
Yeah. And the truck is behind them. Go in the opposite direction. You'd get up and you'd run to the truck, get in the truck, start the truck, drive the hell away. That seems kind of fishy. And then he said that they spent the night out there, but they didn't talk.
This is what I mean. Like, if that happened to me, I would be out of there so fucking fast.
Nothing could entice me to stay out there.
Yeah.
Nothing. No. But they didn't discuss it.
And they didn't. This is what I mean. You have something surprising happen. You learn. You want to tell everybody.
Right.
It's the only thing in your mind. You're obsessing about it. Because why the fuck wouldn't you? And then you don't talk about it. You don't respond reasonably about it. It didn't happen.
And then he said it's probably the last time he'll ever visit Arizona. He probably got some weird pot that it was dusted with something. They're down near the border.
Yeah.
You know, who knows? I mean, if they went down to Bisbee and picked up some dope from some freak that was across the border, it could have been laced with anything.
And that was recently? So it really could have been.
It really
been the last few years.
Yeah, it was the last.
It could
few
have
years.
been laced with a number of different things.
So
there's what's called research chemicals, which are usually analogs of illegal substances, which are themselves actually illegal because of the Chemical Analog Act or whatever it's called. People are buying them with impunity. So they have unique effects supposedly that are beyond what the effects they're trying to get because it's an analog. And I have actually heard because they're analogs and people are buying them, they feel safe buying them, that people have been lacing, like, more common things with, like, MDMA is illegal, but there are analogs to it being sold, but they also have, like, really bad side effects. Right. And you don't know the dosage. There could be all sorts of completely undocumented effects.
Yeah. Even just pot, though. If he was driving down from Utah and drove through Nevada, he could have gotten legal weed. And that stuff you buy in those shops there is way stronger than street stuff. And so they might have just been stoned. You're absolutely right, Joey. I didn't think of that, but their reaction was completely bizarre for the circumstances. They should have gotten up, turned around, and run the opposite direction.
I mean, I couldn't imagine.
And then to stay there.
Unless you have a genetic, like, disorder that makes you act like a fainting goat, essentially, where you cannot move if you're afraid. I just absolutely cannot imagine not getting up and getting the fuck out of there immediately.
Okay, so I think it was a dust devil with tumbleweeds in it, and I don't think it took as long as he thinks. and I think they were stoned, and then I think he probably embellished it.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, embellishment. Like, for instance, it's huge. It's like 5 feet high.
Right.
You know, it drifted right past my face. It was like within a few feet. So you can imagine this like tumbleweed blob that's kind of scooting along,
right.
and it goes like past their camp.
Right.
Or maybe there's a like other tumbleweeds, so they go back to the truck, you know, because they're blowing around, and they come back to camp. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then it's embellished to be a 40-foot high mountain writhing mass of vibrating
monster.
needles or whatever.
Yeah.
So all in all, I can't say I trust their unreliable narrators, whatever. I can't say I trust anything they say. So there's no telling what it was.
There isn't. As far as Chris and Danny go, I think they really saw something, or I think Chris really saw something. I don't know if Danny did or not, because Danny won't talk about it, and the only thing way back when is he backed Chris up when Chris was telling the story, but he, you know, it's not like he goes around and tells anybody, but he is extremely religious. Chris said some weird, creepy things when he was a kid, and it's
easy when you're the only one there to claim it's something you witnessed rather than something you came up with.
Yeah.
Though in that case, I can say, like, if they're telling the truth, then it could be this, this, and this.
Yeah.
Or it's a believable, like, if there were outside, you know, paranormal events taking place there, that you know, it's believable. It's like, okay, here's my paranormal story. A giant extra-dimensional squid monster came and flattened my entire town, and then it floated around the entire planet for 5 days, and then it disappeared. That's obviously not believable.
Right.
But even if you say, okay, I'm entertaining that this person is telling the truth, then it's still not believable. But a black blob floating in the desert, assuming they're telling the truth and they witnessed something, and you're assuming it's paranormal, that's believable.
Okay, so the biggest difference I see between the two stories, which both are talking about amorphous blobs, is that Chris's story is something that he saw that is, I don't want to say believable so much as it doesn't seem like it's blown out of proportion.
Yeah.
You know, he saw something the size of a trash bag moving towards him in the desert.
Yeah, that's a good point. So you could imagine, like, instead they say, yeah, it flew like at supersonic speeds right up to us.
Yeah.
It was within inches of my face, and
you
know.
I mean, they could have embellished it, or they could have, in hysteria, had some other event. So I think that they were really truly telling what they. I think I'm going to take Danny out of the equation because I don't know what Danny thinks, but I think Chris was really and truly telling what he honestly believed happened. And he never identified what he thought it was. It's not like he said, I think it was a monster out there.
That's a good point.
He never said anything like that. He never said, you know, as far as I know, he never put any other weird sensations or experiences or reactions to it, except they were terrorized and they ran and they met up with my mom. So, and it followed them the whole way. But as you said, there's mirages, you know, there's lots of different things that could be, and there might be something out there in the desert. It also could have been an animal. Because,
of course.
Coyotes at certain time of the year and in certain light look pretty dark. And if it was an injured coyote or a dog,
town is within
somebody
only a few
could have
miles.
dropped their dog out there in the desert, and it might have been injured and trying to get to them, and they're just running away, freaking out. You know,
and dogs, the fluffiness of a dog makes it look could make it look completely round.
Yeah.
Or a bird, or a rabbit, or hell, a goat.
I've never seen a goat in the desert. Well, mountain sheep, but
sheep, whatever.
Well, so
no, hell, goats, horses, fucking any sort of animal.
Yeah, it could have been all kinds of things. And I think that I think Chris really saw something. I think he really couldn't identify what it was, and I think it really terrified him. The other people, I'm not so sure they they saw anything. But if they did, I'm saying dust devil with weeds in it, with tumbleweeds in it, and they were stoned. That's what I think. And then he embellished it.
Yeah, I could see that. Or entirely fabricated. I mean, that's what I would lean to, is one of those.
Yeah, okay, so I could see this. They're sitting there drinking a couple beers in the desert, and they start talking, what if we saw this and such? And then they manufacture an entire
kind of
thing.
mutates too.
And then he just tells the story. Yeah, I can see that. What do you think? Have you ever seen a black blob out in the desert, or even somewhere else? Joe didn't convince me that the first one was something easily explained, but the second story, I'm pretty skeptical. Let us know what you think. Our contact information is in the show notes, and as always, if you have a story to tell, send it to us. Please share, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and never be so terrified you can't run.